Okay, I think we're streaming live on Facebook now. I was just mentioning to Lauren that I've not done this before, so I'm not 100% sure that how this is looking on the Facebook end, but I hope that you're with us. I'll try to bounce back and forth to try and see if people are kind of joining with us or putting comments underneath. So my name is Will Posey. I get to be the pastor at First Methodist here in Murphy, North Carolina. And for the last couple of weeks, and for the next few weeks through the season of Lent, we're thinking about resilience, and especially the theme of like resilient faith. So faith that can face and endure in the midst of adversity. Resilience is a thing that's just kind of like up in the air, and I hear people talking about it in a lot of ways here lately. And so I thought it would probably be a good idea to talk to somebody who knows a whole lot more about resilience than I do. So enter my very good friend, Lauren Oakes. Um, I got to know Lauren when I was serving as one of the pastors at First Methodist in Hickory, and really value my friendship with Lauren, with her husband, Casey, and have a daughter, Amelia, and another little acorn, another little boy on the way. And so that is really exciting. So Lauren is not just an amazing friend who is deep and sensitive and thoughtful thinker, but she's a licensed clinical social worker. And she works at Horizons Elementary School as the school social worker there. And Horizons, tell me if this is the right way to characterize it or not. Horizons is what maybe we would think of as like an alternative school.
It is,
Is
yes.
that like the right way to say it?
Yes, it's a elementary alternative school, and then there is also an embedded day treatment program.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So, so Lauren, like you think about resilience from time to time, and I wonder if maybe you could just kind of start by jumping into thinking about or sharing with us what got you started thinking about resilience and thinking about it as being, especially important.
Whenever I started as a school social worker, one of my first roles, I was hired through a grant initially, and just part of my role will collect data and do a little bit of overseeing on a program, a curriculum that the county schools use that's called Why Try. And it is specifically a resiliency building kind of toolkit with lessons and activities and things to foster resiliency skills in kids. So that I think is where I first was hearing the term and learning about just what is resiliency. Um, but besides that, it's ended up shaping kind of my entire mission and framework of working in the alternative school population, because most of the kids that we're serving here have faced a lot of hardship in their life, and are learning new skills and just either working on their own personal growth and healing, or needing to just get back into the swing of what does it mean to be successful in public school.
Mhm.
So for various reasons, just a lot of the direct work that I'm doing with students is related to building their resiliency.
So one of the things I've heard people talk before about is like ACEs, and I think maybe you've talked about this with me too, that kids face adverse childhood experiences. Is that okay? That's the acronym. So what are some of the adversities that you find that kids are facing? And my bet is like anybody listening to this can probably, if maybe you're listening, you get like check boxes, right? So what are some of the things that you find kids facing that's, I don't know, weighing down on them?
Yeah. So the like initial ACEs study, whenever people are talking about adverse childhood experiences, that is related to 10 specific experiences that kids could have gone through. And so most of those are falling under the categories of abuse, neglect, or things that have just happened within the family system. But now, whenever looking broadly at like childhood trauma and adversity, it is expanded a lot. So like things that were not initially included in that ACEs category could be things such as like homelessness,
Mhm.
and other factors related to poverty, or just different struggles that people go through that again maybe don't hit those criterias of the abuse, neglect, or disruption from a family system, but still interrupt optimal child growth and development, I suppose you could say. So with, I mean, there, yeah, like I said, in terms of like the lists and things you're going down, just a lot of different hardships and some heartbreaking stories, but then sometimes it's just life stress, right? And the toll that if it's like stress after stress after stress, that it can just, you know, turn into something that can be overwhelming a child's ability to cope.
So some maybe like big stressors, maybe like a divorce or a parent is incarcerated, but then there's probably like chronic low level stressors that just like compound.
Yeah.
So and then maybe now if in this last year we've added to that list of ACEs like a global health pandemic.
Yes.
You know, like everybody's checking that box. I mean, I talk to high school kids that are, I mean, just kind of living that story all the time. So let's talk about like what in the world do we mean by resilience? Because obviously this is important to you and your work, what you do with your student population. So what is resilience? How would you describe that for folks?
So there's, I mean, you hear a couple different definitions, but they all kind of encompass the same thing. So you hear like the ability to bounce back from hardship, wellness despite stress that's going on in your life, or like overall positive outcomes in life despite hardships.
The ability to bounce back, wellness. What was that one? Wellness in the face of?
Or wellness despite stress in your life.
Despite stress. Yeah. I read a story or an article written by a professor of mine from seminary and expected it to be him to start it with a quote from some church father or story from the history of the church. But instead he quoted Chumbawamba's song Tub Thumping.
Yeah, there you go.
I get knocked down, but I get up again. Right, and you're never going to get me down. And he's like, that like epitomizes resilience in a lot of ways. And I thought, wow, I didn't see that coming. But C. Kevin Rowe just kind of surprises like that sometimes. You mentioned when we've talked in another moment about 4 types of resilience. Could you explain what each of those types are? And maybe as you kind of go along, give a little bit of a picture, or maybe they are pictures in themselves of resilience.
Yeah. So whenever I mentioned that like my initial training on resilience came from this program called Why Try, the guy that created that program, that his name is Christian Moore. So I want to make sure that I'm citing that he's the guy that kind of like coined these terms. And he broke resilience down into like 4 categories or 4 types. And one of the things that whenever like we're promoting resiliency, you know, research or talking about it, is like the old versus new mindset with it, where we used to think that, oh, like some people just got resilience, like it's just like a character trait or something that happens. That some had resilience and some don't.
And if you don't, tough luck, right?
Yeah. That's just like, why do some people still seem to come out thriving in, you know, with really hardships in life, and then other people just, you know, succumb to the pressure. But it's about how, I guess resilience is not something that is static, right? Like it can be taught, it can be nurtured. And so looking at the different categories, there could be areas where people are very strong in one capacity and then maybe haven't experienced or don't have as much of like the skill and strength in other areas, but still you can add on and nurture and grow through these different types. So one of them is called resource resilience, and it is about just the things that we have access to, like just our resources. And these are both external things and internal. So, I mean, whenever you're talking about external resources, like what are the things you can tap into, like, you know, a great school system or community center, different programs, or relationships, like, if you have a brother-in-law that's an accountant and can help you out of a financial mess, or it's like, what are the supports around you that you can use? But there's also internal resources. So this can be your mindset. If you are a, kind of optimistic, locus of control kind of person, these can be your skills and your talents that you already possess naturally, being gifted at something, that, you can use that to pull you through a hard time. And then, so these can also be other just skills and things that you nurture through, going to therapy and like learning new skills and things like that too. Yeah, so external and internal resources in your life, that's one of them.
Okay.
Another one is called relational resilience. And so this would be whenever you are pulling through or overcoming stress through the important relationships in your life. So whenever I think of this one, I think of the single parent working 2 jobs, barely scraping by, exhausted, but they get up and do it every day for their kids. And so like there is somebody, like when you can't do it for yourself, you can do it for someone else. So a lot of times these are your closest relationships, someone that relies on you. But then it doesn't even have to be a person. It could be like a pet, it could be a person with depression that doesn't want to get out of bed that day, but it's like, oh, I got to go walk the dog, so that like I have to let the dog out. And so just that someone else relying on you is something that can pull you through a tough time. Then their next one is street resilience. And this one, street resilience. And so I think of this one as the like stick it to the man kind of resilience.
Okay.
And this is the one where you channel anger or pain from your life into energy, where you want to prove others wrong. And I think of a quote from one of the songs from Hamilton where they're saying like, he has something to prove, he has nothing to lose. And so that could be the attitude. So I think of a student that I worked with that had a lot of hard times in life, was bullied in school and had a lot of people say, like, you're not going to make it, you're nothing, and just like really, really putting them down. But then they're like, just you wait, like, I'm going to go to college. When I'm done with college, I'm going to get my master's degree. And you know what? After I get my master's degree, I'm going to go and get my PhD. So whenever I run into those people in Walmart and they're just like, hey, how's it going? They could be like, it's doctor now. Yeah. And so it's like just wanting to prove people wrong, that can be a good source of energy to overcome stress too.
So if like relational resilience is about doing it for others, maybe street resilience is about doing it kind of like for myself. Like I'm going to do this to prove to others.
We're almost like doing it in spite of others.
Oh, like in spite of others. Okay, so not for others, but in spite of like, okay, stick it to the man resilience. Okay, street resilience. I like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the final one is rock bottom resilience. And so this is the one that shows up in, just by the name, like in tragedy or when you lose everything. So, after a unexpected death or just, again, just feeling like your entire world is imploding. A lot of times this is the one that gets brought up related to addiction. And so rock bottom is just this capacity that people still seem to have to put one foot in front of another when it makes no sense. So you think of like, that indomitable spirit of human nature, like what keeps us going when we have every reason to give up? And a lot of times that's the one that might be hardest to explain. And people may not know that they even have the capacity for this one until they're there. But there is this phenomenon known as post-traumatic growth that, people can just suddenly spring up with remarkable things after they hit rock bottom moments in their life. Yeah, so this is the one that actually, I mean, like all of these can tie into faith in different ways. But I think like that rock bottom one is like, how do you explain that? And so I wonder if that is the place where, you know, God comes in, or it's like, what is carrying us through when we've got nothing left to give?
Mm-hmm. I wonder, so since you're going there, so would you talk about, I'm gonna have a piece of paper and I'm gonna draw it.
Mhm.
Because I draw things. You gave me like a seesaw image one time. Would you kind of explain the seesaw thing while I draw a picture of a seesaw?
Yes. So overall, a lot of times resilience is described using a metaphor of a scale. So like I mean, nowadays we all have digital scales, but the old fashioned ones that are like, yeah, the seesaw kind of looking thing. Um, and so with that, if you have like the two sides of the scale, in life, we are going to have negatives, right? Negative things going to happen. And that's going to start like weighing us down. And then on the other end of the scale, there's going to be positive things, right? And so in, I guess, in ideal life, we'd hope that there'd be a lot more positive, and so that like our outcomes and things in life would be on that positive side. But, you know, realistically, it's going to be going up and down just throughout all time. So the biggest thing with the scale metaphor and talking about resilience is the fact that we cannot erase the negative in our life. There is really no way that we can completely get rid of all of the bad things that might have happened. It's like, you know, we might be able to change things for the future, but things that have happened in our past, we can't change them. We can't get rid of them. So how do we move towards the positive? There are two ways to move towards positive. So negatives weighing you down. One option is to keep throwing on as much positive as you can. So positive experience in life. So that could be the getting help, the community support, like tangible supports, experiences, like adding more positive relationships to our life. So you could just overload the positive to outweigh the negative. But the other thing that you can look at is the fulcrum of the scale. So that middle part that the scale is resting on, you can manipulate positive versus negative outcomes by where you shift the fulcrum. So in the metaphor, that fulcrum is going to be those internal factors, our internal beliefs, our mindset, our use of positive coping tools, learning different practices. I mean, like mindfulness activities are things that can keep us centered and help us regulate our bodies when we're experiencing stress. So yeah, using that scale metaphor is like the two ways
Yeah.
to create resilience: add positives or to shift where we are internally.
So some of the like piling on, here's my picture of a scale.
Oh, nice.
Isn't that good? Look at the
Mhm.
negative things are weighing down, and the positive things up here, and then the fulcrum in the middle there. It's a good picture. I'm really savvy with computer stuff. So some examples maybe of how you overload positives. So you're talking about reaching out to somebody who can offer professional help, like a counselor. Would some other examples of overloading the positive be, you're feeling like isolated or lonely, so it's pick up the phone and call a friend, or better, like go outside and go for a walk with somebody, get a little bit of like vitamin D, right?
Mhm.
Um, eat a piece of good, eat some good food.
Yeah.
Um, During Lent, I've tried to suggest, Lent is usually the time where we're like giving up lots of things in the Christian church, and it's like a time of self-sacrifice and asceticism, and like giving up the good food that we normally would eat, or withdrawing. And I've tried to suggest to people, maybe you still do that right now, or maybe right now this is the sort of season where instead it might be more meaningful to seek community in whatever way you can, or to delight in good food and experience the love of God made delectable, like one of my professors used to say. So those are some examples of adding on to the positive.
Yeah. And like, I like how you honed in on like the simple everyday things. Because I think a lot of times that when working with children and youth, a lot of times they're talking about like kids that have had hard things in life where it's like, where can you get them on youth sports teams and like just like other things that are like activities based too. Like taking them fishing, like having like these trips or other positive experiences. Um, but yeah, but so it doesn't have to necessarily like be these big commitments or huge experiences. It could just be those little tiny everyday things. And it's fun because then part of that does like transfer over into those internal things about the stopping and pausing and savoring little moments where things are well.
Say more about that. So what are some of those internal resources or ways that we can move the fulcrum internally? What is mindfulness? What does that kind of mean? What does that look like in terms of moving the fulcrum?
So a lot of them are things I think at this point folks might be kind of over the cliches of like self-care where it's like, oh, I'm tired of being told to like eat right and exercise and like that kind of stuff, but
Sure.
spending time out in nature. So whenever we're talking about mindfulness type things, it's pausing to just be in the moment. um, and so a lot of times, so if the present moment that you're in is good or even just okay, I mean, that's, better than a bad moment. So just
Mhm.
being able to pause and just realize like at this second, I am safe. At this second, my needs are met. Right now, I have like my water bottle here that I can take a sip of water if I need to. Um, and like it's letting your body settle and self-regulate. And because I think we a lot of times we're walking through life as like balls of stress and we feel it inside of our body where like our shoulders are hunched and our breath is tight. And um, whenever you engage in mindfulness activities, it just is like this unwinding. And yeah, it's just letting your body settle and have just even a split second of goodness and healing. So as much that we can tap into that is going to, again, help lower our stress levels and then make our minds more clear-headed to deal with whatever struggles are in front of us.
And so can some of that, so if you're in a moment where things are not good,
Mhm.
so maybe some of that I think you've mentioned to me before is like recalling a good memory,
Mhm.
um, or like humming a song, like rapid reset. Is that a thing?
Yeah.
Like singing a quick song or a chorus. I find our Nora, our youngest daughter, is not sleeping all that great at this moment. So I find, as much for myself, maybe for her, I'm like, this is a very pastor thing. I'm humming a hymn while I
Mhm.
hold her, like the same hymn, every night, and that at least like settles me down.
Yes.
Um, and you talked about water. You said this one time, and that's coming back to mind. Drinking a
Yeah.
sip of water. Do we talk about that for just a second? Because you talked about a sip of water and a bear. Talk
Yes.
about this. Talk about the water and the bear.
Sure. So for folks that are listening to, I was telling Will about these things that are called rapid resets. And those are taught through a program called Reconnect for Resilience. And one of them is taking a sip of water. And I think of these as like stress hacks or like a way to like hack your brain to like turn off stress. And so one of them, taking a sip of water. And so like I invite anyone that's watching, if you have a beverage or something near you, to just like go ahead, grab, it could anything, and take a sip. But when you do it, actually notice what is happening in your body while you drink it, and to see how far can you feel the liquid pass from your mouth to your throat, and how deep into your body can you feel it. So like a couple things at this time, like I just noticed with myself, like, cause now that I'm talking and, being a little nervous being on live right now, is it gave me a second where it's like, oh, everything just like turned off for a second. And I took a deep breath. The actual act of drinking something kind of induces you to take a deep breath. Like the action of it is kind of like you take a breath in and you hold it while you're swallowing, and then you do that like kind of thing.
Oh yeah,
So
ah.
without telling people like, hey, take a deep breath, it helps with stress, taking a sip of water just kind of gets your body back into that rhythm. But then there's something even deeper biologically that happens, because drinking or eating sends a signal to your brain that you are safe in this moment. So bringing it back to the bear that you were teasing before, is that, if you are in the woods being chased by a bear and running for your life, you're not going to pause for a sip of water, right?
Right.
If you're just like running and in
Right.
that fight or flight kind of mode, then you're not pausing to take a sip. And so whenever you do that, and whenever you get that input into your body, it is just a moment of like, hey, I'm okay right now. Like there's no bear here or no threat because I'm drinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I've got a second. The bear is not actually chasing me. Or if it feels like there is a bear chasing you, maybe like metaphorically, if you take that sip of water, maybe you all of a sudden realize that the bear, whatever the bear is not actually chasing me, or that I actually do have a minute
Yeah.
to breathe and to assess kind of
Yeah.
where I am and reset a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I was in another, separate training years ago, and one of the people presenting was a EMS worker, and he was saying, like, he picked up just an ordinary plastic water bottle, and he's saying, this is the most important tool I take with me to a call. Like whenever they are responding to a crisis, or people that just came out of a house fire or something, and they are either like talking a million miles per hour or like in a state of shock or something, that handing them that water bottle, opening it up for them and being like, take a sip of this, like have a drink, that you're saying like that is the thing that just kind of like brings them back, either calms them down or brings them back out of like a freeze shock state.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love that, man. And in the church world, gosh, we could play with that image of like water all the live long day, couldn't we?
Yeah.
Well, let's think about that for a minute. I shared with you, I'm trying to think about resilient faith and talk about faith, and how we hold on to our trust in God, not just the things that we think, but the way of life that we live, even in the face of adversity. For me, there's a couple of passages of scripture that really just kind of epitomize that. And Paul talks about this, like resilience. I mean, he talks about rejoicing in all circumstances. And in Romans, he talks about suffering produces endurance, character, hope doesn't disappoint us. 2 Corinthians 4, he talks about we are, what does he say? We are afflicted but not crushed, perplexed but not driven to despair. So maybe that wellness despite stress kind of thing. And I've been preaching through Mark, and I think you and I talked at one point when we first talked about this idea, and you said, gosh, the Bible is just this like library of resilience stories. But before we get to the resilience part of that, from where you see, thinking about adverse experiences, what are adverse experiences that you see that like are a threat to or disturb or disrupt that like trust in God?
Wow. Yeah. So that's like a deep question too. Because I think a lot of times, I don't know, it's like it goes back and forth. I can think a lot of times where there are big losses in people's lives. So again, whether it is, you know, a death versus losing a job versus just falling out of relationships, that a lot of times it's like, where is God in that? Or like maybe even labeling it as like big disappointments in life. That kind of might lead to that thought of like, is there anyone up there taking care of me?
Mm-hmm.
But there's also like the flip side of that, though, where I also think that there's a lot of times where tragedy brings people closer to God. So like that's kind of an interesting thing too. Like that could be something that breaks down that feeling of relationship and connection that you have with God, but then that could be something that sparks it anew.
maybe some of that like rock bottom maybe that's where some of that rock bottom resilience kind of stuff maybe comes in, where like it's elusive, like it's hard to put our finger on it, but in those moments of desperation or great crisis, like this is where God maybe shows up more.
It makes me think of that quote, and I don't know if it is actually a Mother Teresa quote or a quote that's like misattributed to Mother Teresa. That's you don't realize Jesus is all you need until Jesus is all you have.
Huh.
So
Yeah.
that's something that I think of with those rock bottom moments. But I think that it's just very normal too for people to have up and downs in their faith and their feelings of connection, both with God and with just the church in general, like as an institution. So different things could bring that in and out at different periods in your life. And I mean, I know that, yeah, during this time of a global pandemic where people aren't actually in church buildings, that is probably a lot easier to feel distant from God or from your faith community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh gosh. And some of what you're saying there too makes me think, Mark, the Gospel of Mark that I'm preaching through this season, so many instances in there where I think like the disciples and other people are facing, all kinds of like crises or adverse experiences that call to question a trust in God. Where there are moments where like following Jesus all of a sudden is really hard, and there's this question of like, is it worth it? Or was I better off, keeping my head low? I mean, people following Jesus in his day, and then decades later, the wars and rumors of wars are like happening in their midst. The Jewish-Roman War between 68 and 70 something, putting Christians like in the crosshairs of everybody, and they're wondering, like, is this worth it? This is really hard. Is the hardness of following Jesus worth it right now? Or like what you're talking about, crisis, a death, or some measure of like disillusionment or feeling disconnected. Gosh, a lot of feelings of disconnection these days, of like watching church online and wondering, is anybody else doing this with me? Or are the other people who are doing this with me, like, how are they feeling right now too? We're made for each other, and so it's hard to kind of hang in apart from that. So maybe you've given us 4 kind of ways of thinking about resilience: your resource resilience, relational resilience, street resilience, and that rock bottom resilience. I wonder if we can think for just a minute, are there ways that you see you can apply any of those forms of resilience to like a resilient faith? Resource, relational, street.
Sure. So we can like go down the list again. So like resource resilience, whenever you're talking about those external things, I guess that makes me think of, again, like the things that are like the programs. So if like it's the church programs that are being provided, if there is some sort of mentorship, whether it's between adults and youth or adults and adults, right? Like walking next to each other, to have some way to create and nurture relationships. Like what kind of counseling services are being offered. And then even again, just those tangible supports, I mean, food ministries, like, paying electric bills. I mean, things like that, that happen through church that again, pull us back in and keep us connected and are meeting both our like, worldly needs, but through that is keeping us connected, with the faith as well. But then the internal resources, I think, that are keeping us connected to our faith could be, I mean, different knowledge, wisdom, like, deeper understanding of all of these stories of tragedy and triumph that are in the Bible. And then our family stories, right? Like if you have stories connected to faith in your family and your family history, that those can be really powerful internal resources too. I don't know if you can think of anything else kind of spinning off of those.
Well, I was thinking, we talked a little bit about stuff. We're kindred spirits in this, where like I think you and I both like are drawn to like old things in the church. Some people will talk like smells and bells or the tradition or liturgy of the church, but those, to me, those feels like external resources of the church or of our faith that we can grab a hold of, that we can smell, that we can say, we can stand and sit down, and that for me ground me in something that's bigger than myself, or that ground me in a story that's bigger than the story that I'm living right this moment. Like it puts me in a larger narrative, and I wonder if that would be like an external resource that you can hold on to in those kind of moments.
Yeah, I definitely see that. And that, again, just things that make you feel more connected to the greater purpose or to something bigger than you. I mean, all of those, yeah, anything that makes you feel connected to others or to a purpose is going to be a resource as well.
For the relational resilience, this is the do it for others resilience.
Yeah.
So this,
I was gonna say, this is the one that makes me think of the joke of just like the Catholic guilt or something about the just like, oh, what would my mother think if she knew I wasn't going to church
yeah,
anymore or something like that.
yeah.
Yeah, so
Positively, it could also be, sometimes we show up to church so that we can share our faith with other people, so that our confidence in God is encouraging to others for whom theirs is like running low.
yeah.
Other times, like we show up because our faith and our confidence is low, and we need to hear other people say that creed. I believe in God, and that we it's kind of like a mutual thing. So we're like doing it for others sometimes.
Yes. And so, yeah, there's some times where we just have to fully rely on other people kind of carrying us through something. But through that, like other people carrying you for a while, again, keeps you connected enough that eventually you get back on your feet.
Okay. Yep. Street resilience, sticking it to the how we talk about street resilience with our faith.
So whenever I think about this, or if I try to think of somebody with street resilience, it makes me think of in the Bible, like Jacob, right? I mean, he was just like such a cheater and a scoundrel for most of the time. And then the story about wrestling with God or God's angel or however, that is interpreted, that like when it's talking about faith and then this idea of street resilience, I think of the fact that like it's okay to be really mad at God sometimes. God can handle that.
Mm-hmm.
And that may be the time that you are, furious about something in life that could, these like arguments we feel like we're having with God. I mean, like, hey, is that making you pray more than you were before when things were good? And just this idea of like wrestling with somebody, wrestling with big faith questions, or why am I doing this, or what is the point, or is it better to just keep my head low? That wrestling is a way that actually brings us closer with others, including God. Wrestling with God brings us closer to God.
Yeah. I like that. Street resilience, wrestling with God. What about this rock bottom business?
See, this is the one that's like, I feel like I don't have a good answer for that, because that's the one that just seems like so intangible, where whenever we're in these rock bottom moments or feel like you're about to throw it all in, or, I don't believe any of this nonsense anymore or something like that, that there's still like, it seems like there's still just like some spark of human nature that keeps us going. And I don't know, like a belief in something. What is that? And it just like slowly being pulled out. So like, I wonder if that spark that keeps us going whenever we hit rock bottom, like, is that God? Is that part of human nature? Or is it like a combination where it's like, if people are made in God's image, is that like a characteristic of both God and humans, that there is still something that keeps us moving forward despite all odds?
No, man, gosh, that could be like one of those both and things, right? Like this is the moment when God shows up, and this is the moment when God awakens, our humanity, in a way that maybe we didn't know was true in ourselves, and awakens in us the image of God that maybe had fallen asleep.
Yeah.
So here's the thing so you gave me the seesaw thing, not seesaw, scale. Sorry.
Scale.
And this is what I thought about. So this is, again, this is the scale, my fancy drawing. So adverse things in our lives, positive things, we overload them, and then the fulcrum here in the middle. So this is how I like read you or thought about that. So triangle. So what's that symbol make church people think about? The Trinity, right? Like Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So I kind of tend to think in those like rock bottom moments, this is a moment where we're not moving the fulcrum, but like that's when God moves in. Like those are the moments, that's grace. I mean, through and through, like that we don't do it ourselves, but those are the moments where God is near to the brokenhearted. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed, God moves into those places of suffering and hardship, and adversity in our lives. Like the cross, Jesus moves in, and the scale can't be tipped at that moment. We was just reading this morning, Mark chapter 7, the disciples on the boat, storm all around, and then here comes Jesus trotting across the water, and then Jesus gets in the boat with them, and it's like it stops. I mean, we wish that things would be that simple in our lives, that Jesus gets in the boat and the hard things in our life stop. That's not always the case. Like hard things still happen and go on, but it may be the case that God's presence with us gives us that wellness despite the stress, or that ability to persevere or to bounce back. We keep getting pushed down again. And I think that's grace. I think that's where God shows up in a way that we can't. That's my kind of take on grace and the scale, picture of resilience, that doesn't take away the hard things by any stretch, but it's Jesus kind of like getting into it. That's the incarnation right there.
Yeah, I love that. So I've never, like, I use that picture and that image all the time, and I'm never going to look at it the same way again now.
Well, thank you for giving that to me. That has helped me tremendously. Thanks for making time to talk with me a bit about resilience. I think we could probably do this all the live long day. You might need to go and nurture some resilience in some of your kids here really soon. But thank you for making some time to do this and to be on this call with me today. But before we go, I have just a couple of really quick rapid fire questions for you before you leave. Do you have like a couple of really quick minutes for this? So this is like really quick. Like you don't have to think it. Don't overthink it. Just like,
I'm bad at this because I'm very much an overthinker.
Don't overthink it, Lauren. Just fire it out there. Are you ready? Just fire it out there. Are you ready?
Okay.
Drink of water. Deep breath. Here we go. Finish this sentence. Resilience is
bouncing back from hard things.
There we go. I get knocked down, but I get up again. You're never going to get me down. That's it. Oh, that leads right into this next one. On the soundtrack of my life, this is my resilience theme song.
Oh gosh, there's so many. I live in like a soundtrack life. Okay, the first one that popped into my head is the song by Sia, The Greatest.
All right. Okay, cool. One story of resilience in scripture that is encouraging to me is
that is encouraging. Gosh, I love my favorite book of the Bible is Isaiah, because I think that it encompasses the full scope of tragedy and like the beauty and goodness just in the world and life and our faith tradition. And so there are just some gorgeous passages in there that are the ones that I'd just love to go back and visit if I ever need to hear some good words.
Yeah. They call it the fifth gospel.
Yes.
Isaiah. So last one. When life comes crashing in, one happy place I go to in my mind is
snuggling with Amelia, my daughter. We call it being in my kangaroo pouch. I wear a bathrobe a lot at home. She's starting to get too big for this. I hope that it never happens. but I'll hold her and snuggle her up close to me and then wrap her around inside my bathrobe. And I can just feel her like still and warm against me. And so that is just one of my internal resource happy places that I just love visiting that memory all the time. And we do it pretty much every morning. So it's like a constantly evolving memory from when she was this big to now her feet like stretching down to the knee. So she's almost.
That's a good happy place to go. That's awesome. Lauren Oakes, thank you so much for joining with me today. I sure appreciate you. Friends and everybody who's watching, I hope that you'll take a sip of water. Remember, the bear's not chasing you and it's not as big as you think. Take a deep breath. Yeah, and go in peace. Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you.